Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, our guest has been described as the Tories' token ghetto boy. Others, more sympathetic, see him as a surprise Conservative candidate for next year's London mayoral election. Sean Bailey joins me for an exclusive chat. And as the clock strikes down to the end of the transition period, a Brexit trade deal appears increasingly unlikely as significant differences remain on both sides. We'll be analysing the flashpoints of the week. Then later, an update from Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at NAGA, on the unprecedented state of US politics following President Donald Trump's positive COVID-19 diagnosis. And to our first topic, Brexit. Whilst representatives from both Brussels and Downing Street insist that they are keen to strike a free trade deal within the next couple of weeks, several areas of disagreement remain. Last week, the EU announced it was beginning the process of legal action against the UK and gave London until the end of October to respond. Fishing remains one of the key sticking points for a deal, with the UK insisting it will defend its fishing waters. And Brussels have raised questions over the level of support governments can give to industry. The EU is concerned that British plans to subsidise sectors such as technology will amount to unfair competition. Speaking after a meeting with the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier, the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said the EU wanted to be constructive and was still aiming for a deal.
Es sind derzeit viele Fragen offen. Und wenn wir es noch schaffen wollen, ins Ziel zu kommen, dann müssen wir jetzt in all diesen offenen Fragen auch wirklich vorankommen. Und es steht vielleicht, auch das muss man sagen, denn im letzten Jahr ist viel passiert, es steht jetzt vielleicht noch mehr auf dem Spiel, als das vor einem Jahr der Fall gewesen ist. Die Corona-Pandemie hat die Gespräche noch schwieriger gemacht, und zwar in jeder Hinsicht. Aber sie hat auch eine Einigung noch dringlicher gemacht.
This sense of urgency was echoed by the European Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič during a speech delivered to members of the European Parliament.
In case we reach an agreement, which is our objective, both parties will have to ensure ratification in time for an entry into force by 1st January 2021. And this will need some time, including time for this House. If this is not the case, we will be in the no-deal territory. Given that we are less than 100 days away from this date, we cannot exclude this scenario.
This scenario cannot be excluded, but the British Prime Minister insists he wants a deal.
I think it's there to be done. I think, alas, there are some difficult issues that need to be fixed, and the EU needs to understand that we're utterly serious about needing to control our own laws and our own regulations. Similarly, they need to understand that the repatriation of the UK's fisheries, which were lost in 1973, is very important. All we're asking our friends and partners to offer is terms that they've already offered Canada, which is a long way away from here. We're very close to our European friends and partners. We've been members of the EU for 45 years. I see no reason why we shouldn't get those sorts of terms. I don't want the Australian WTO type outcome particularly, but we can more than live with it.
For more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, lots of talk about it being impossible to get a deal on time, but Michel Barnier was in Germany this week and hope seems to have been restored.
Yeah, well, we're here talking about Brexit and the updates every week, aren't we? And every week it seems to be bleaker than the last week in terms of the mood music coming out of both Westminster and the EU and Brussels. But this time there's a few rays of hope on the horizon, potentially about getting a deal at the end of October. So first of all is that Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, had a meeting, socially distant, a remote meeting, whatever you call it, on Saturday, and they both agreed to speed up negotiations. They said, let's sort of put, we think we can get somewhere, let's try and have a few more. So this week they're meeting again. So this is Michel Barnier, as you said, is here in London, and he is continuing negotiations with the UK side of things. So that's one positive. Another thing is, as you said, Michel Barnier in Germany recently, and what seems to have come from that is that he's had a conversation there with Angela Merkel, who seems to have encouraged him to reach out to the fisheries. Now, fisheries is one of these major talking points, one of the main blockages for a deal, it seems to be, between Brussels and London. And he's reached out to the French and the Dutch fisheries to try and see if there's any way of compromise for the UK side. Now, obviously, they will want some kind of compromise on the way back, but that seems to be a little bit of movement in favour of the UK that maybe suggests that there's not sort of that kind of blockage isn't quite as set in stone as maybe we thought it was. But that's only two little rays of sunshine. There's still a lot of negativity around this island's foreign minister, Simon Coveney, says the mood music in Brussels is downbeat, and many thought the UK didn't want a Brexit deal, especially after the publication of that internal markets bill, obviously, which threatened to override some parts of the withdrawal agreement. And obviously a couple of days ago we heard that the EU were starting formal proceedings, legal proceedings against the UK. So, it seems to be a little bit of movement there. But I think the overriding thing to remember is that a failure to get a trade deal would be pretty catastrophic for both countries, or for the UK, but obviously European economies at the moment aren't doing well either. So economically, it would make sense to do a free trade agreement at this time during a pandemic. And I think it's what both sides really do want, even though Boris will come out and say no deal would be good for the UK because we can do this and that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. I think actually, if you look at the economy and the fact that we're in recession, it makes perfect sense. So I think they will be trying over the next coming days. The other thing is that Boris said 15th of October, that's when he wants a deal by. As we've seen so often with Boris and the UK government at the moment, they don't mind a U-turn, and the EU side is saying the end of October is when they'd like to see something done. So I think probably forget that October the 15th deadline. I imagine Thursday next week, which is when it is, we probably won't have a deal by then, but Boris will say, OK, well, we'll give it 2 more weeks, but let's see what happens next week.
Let's see what happens next week and the week after that. Simon Pusey, thank you as always. My next guest has been praised for his successful climb into the British political establishment. Not only is Sean Bailey black and the grandchild of Jamaican Windrush immigrants, the Tory candidate for next year's London mayoral election has been open and honest about his spells of homelessness, joblessness and his brushes with Britain's gangland culture. After turning his life around, Bailey spent 3 years as a special advisor on youth and crime under the former Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron. He'll be hoping that his unique experience will convince Londoners at the ballot box. Sean Bailey, it's a pleasure to have you on Channel's Business Global. It's the first time that I've got to tell you, you're pretty popular because a lot of people that have sat in this studio have spoken your name. How's the campaign going?
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to hear that I'm popular. The campaign's going well. Of course, it's been delayed by a year, which has given me an even bigger chance of winning. I'm working hard all over London, trying to deliver my message and show Londoners actually we have an alternative. As you've seen, the numbers are beginning to come my way, the momentum's there, and I'm just excited to make sure that I get out, get in front of Londoners and show them what I have on offer, the hope that I'm hoping to deliver for London.
Got to tell you, I've read a couple of interviews from you recently. You're all about the town. If it's not social media, it's the tabloids. And your backstory is phenomenal. I've already given a hint of it to our viewers, so I don't need to run through it again. But it is still very, very difficult for you to convince those of a similar background for you to vote Conservatives. Why do you think there is just this missing gap between BAME, not all BAME, but majority of BAME in London, and the Tory party?
I think there's two things. One, the Labour Party love to see those words repeated. It reinforces it. But realistically, I'm a Conservative because I believe in the dignity of work. I believe in being self-held. I believe in the family. And I believe in your right for your future to be not limited by who you are, but how hard you work and what you're prepared to do. And I think that version of Conservatism, a broad, open, holistic conservatism, is for everybody. And I don't think that black communities won't and don't vote Conservative. I think one of the big things that I'm finding, people are constantly telling me, keep going, Sean. You're changing the narrative around conservatism, but most important, changing the narrative around black people. Black people can do anything they like, and your candidacy is showing that. So I'm excited for the opportunity for more black people, more BAME people to look at the Conservative Party and vote for me. Because of course, our election is probably the most personal election. It is about me and what I have planned for London.
You speak frequently about Sadiq Khan, as you should, and you say that he rules from an ivory tower. The left would say that's completely true. I remember listening to Dominic Raab, our Foreign Secretary, talking on Talk Radio, and he compared taking a knee to the Games of Thrones. There's been similar gaffes throughout the Tory party.
So look at what Sadiq Khan has done. Why I made that comment is because he's made so many decisions with no idea of the impact it's going to have on Londoners. Just take the congestion charge. People in local churches and mosques and gurdwaras and temples across London are now calling it the worship camp. He's made this decision with no idea of the impact it will have on people. That's why I've said that. Look at the amount of crime we're suffering from in London. He told a colleague of mine London is safer now than when he became mayor. That's simply not true. It's a statistical fact that rape, burglary and knife crime have all gone up. That's why I made the comment about Ivy Towers. We need a mayor who's going to come down to street level and see what ordinary people are having to tackle every day.
I know you've got to go, Sean. Just two quick questions before you do go, although I'd like you to expand on them. According to your own statistics, 69% of Londoners are still working from home. Are you concerned about the future of the capital, particularly the famed West End? Our studio is literally a stone's throw away. It's empty. It's a ghost town. How can it be revamped, and how can we get people back into the office?
I am very, very concerned about the future of all of London, because London is the ecosystem, and people who sell coffee need people in offices. People need people to support their businesses. So my message to Londoners has been very clear. If you can go back to work safely, if your employer can give you a COVID-safe environment, you should all be trying to get back into London, get London moving. You know, we need to make London work, because if COVID doesn't get up, unemployment will. We must make sure that we don't have huge amounts of unemployment. And that's why I'm staggered that the mayor of London wants to close London down. I'm staggered that he is terrifying people, making people afraid so they won't come in. We must make London work for the good of everybody, rich and poor.
Absolutely. So lastly, Sean, then, what are some of the major concerns you're hearing from Londoners? I presume you speak to them every day. You're definitely on Twitter all of the time. What is coming through? Is it just COVID? Is it more than that? Is it knife crime, for example?
COVID is definitely a big part of the conversation. But traditionally, Londoners have always spoken to these three areas. One is crime, one is housing, and one is transport. And even through the COVID period, crime has remained number one. Housing has been a really, really, really big issue for Londoners, to the point where often when politicians speak about it, Londoners don't believe them anymore. And that's why I'm talking about affordable housing and very clear to show how we're delivering affordable housing. So the big issues are the same issues. All Londoners know them. The thing that I've been trying to add to them is twofold. One, to say I have plans and solutions to the big issues, and two, we've got to deliver some hope to London. Hope for our families, hope for our business, and hope for this city that we're all so proud of. We need London to work. And that is why I've constantly challenged the Mayor of London to come out of his ivory tower, come down and see what we're all dealing with. Because London can prosper and will prosper if we work together. And that's why I'm out and about in London as much as I can be.
Well, absolutely. What a message of hope there, Sean. We'll have to give you back because I've got more questions here for you, but I know you're a really busy man. Sean Bailey, the Conservative London mayoral hopeful for next year's election. Thanks so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be discussing the chaotic state of US politics with Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at investment firm NAGA. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be discussing the upcoming US elections with Jamil Ahmed. But before then, here's some company news for you. Watches of Switzerland has raised its full-year expectations after the company saw sales jump 20% over the last quarter, sending shares up almost 23% on Tuesday. Revenue at the luxury watchmaker beat expectations over the 10 weeks to the 25th of October, hiking 20.2% year-on-year to £202.7 million. The company said strong UK sales helped offset a 23% slump in tourist-related and airport sales as international travel remained scant in the wake of the pandemic. The group said it did not expect sales from tourism and travel to improve for the foreseeable future. Two major operators in the UK's offshore oil and gas sector have agreed to merge. Premier Oil and Chrysaor will together form the biggest independent exploration and production company on the London Stock Exchange. They produce 250,000 barrels of oil and its gas equivalent per day, more than an eighth of the UK total. EIG, a Washington-based energy investment fund, will own 39% of the new company shares. The deal is subject to approvals by regulators, shareholders and creditors. Antivirus software entrepreneur John McAfee has been arrested in Spain and faces extradition to the US, where he has been charged with tax evasion. Prosecutors say he failed to file tax returns for 4 years, despite earning millions from consulting work, speaking engagements, cryptocurrencies, and selling the rights to his life story. None of the income is connected with the software firm which bears his name. Mr. McAfee has not publicly commented on the charges. If convicted, he could face up to 30 years in prison. Now over to our next topic. In just a few weeks' time, Americans will vote for the next president of the world's most powerful country. It has been billed as the most important US presidential election in a generation. US elections are never without chaos and conspiracy theories, but President Donald Trump's unprecedented battle with COVID-19 is certainly one for the history books. Jamil Ahmed, Director of Investment Strategy at NAGA, joins me for more on this. Jamil Ahmed, it's always a pleasure to have you on Channel's Business Global. My goodness, 2020, the word unprecedented has got to be the most searched up word after COVID-19. You've been doing this for years and I've seen you across my business screen all week. Can you just try and sum up the past 7 days and what's happening in America?
I can try. Unprecedented no longer gives justification for what's going on in the world and also what's going on in the market. Let's just say the old saying as a kid, things have turned upside down. And a lot of people have egg on their face because things are so awkward and strange. Essentially, in the last week, we've gone from markets sinking on the president being unhealthy to markets rising on him making a heroic recovery, like something that you would expect from a superhero, to then sinking again because he's being very aggressive on Twitter, to then thinking that, okay, this is just another pantomime, he's just playing up, and the markets are okay again today. Essentially, you don't know whether you're being pulled left or right, or in the case of the market, up or down, and it's very erratic and strange overall. And that's just the last week. When you then factor in everything else that's been completely unbelievable this year, like let's start with, we thought that maybe a war was going to go down in January, and then we have the pandemic, and we might have, or we are having pandemic version 2. If we're going to have that sequel as well, it appears. So overall, things are just completely unpredictable. There's lots of shocks, twists and turns, and the president's health and his miraculous recovery, very heroic. That's just another twist and turn of what's been a very complicated and something that I don't think we're ever going to forget. 2020 is the year we're never going to forget. That's what I think we can say for sure.
Absolutely, and we've still got an election. I've got to ask you, because, you know, if you were obviously in London and when it was Johnson versus Corbyn, we knew the city, of course, had all their money on Boris Johnson. Can you give us an insight on what the markets really want when it comes to next month and the election there? Is it a Biden or is it a Trump win for them?
I don't think the markets have priced in either outcome. That's my honest assessment. I think that the market looks at the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, as being something that would be long-term good for the US economy. He has some very suitable strategic ideas in terms of green investments and how to reshape the US economy for the 2020 plus world. But the problem with investors, they're very sentimental, and we have this thing called recency bias, where investors actually just care about today. And you can understand it because 2020, nobody knows what's going to happen in the next hour. So that's why they have this sensitivity to what's happening now. So essentially, Joe Biden is seen as negative for the US economy today and tomorrow if he is elected because he's less business friendly. But in the longer term, he's seen as a safer option. At the same point, whether we like it or we don't, President Trump gets things done. And generally, for an investor, it's a good thing because he's very business friendly. He's very pro-economic growth. And this comes with long-term obstacles. But again, as an investor, you don't care about the long term because you're trading and investing for today. So I would say that Biden, if his polls continue to suggest that he's winning, and I don't think he's winning by such a stretch, as what has been portrayed. This is negative for market. At the same point, Trump winning is good for the US dollar short term, and it's good for stock markets because you know that he is going to beat his drum to get more pro-US economic policies. Unfortunately, you're going to have a few shocks and turns on the way. For example, last night we saw this famous tweet that, you know what, we're going to stop negotiating with the Democrats. We're just going to stop this fiscal package. And he knows, everybody knows that if this stops, the chances of re-election are lower. At the same point, he looks for the big climax that if he fixes things together, it helps his chances. And that means that we're just going to see more or less the same 4 years if he gets a second term. I'm not ruling it out. I think it's got a better chance than the market is giving credit for. And that's why I think that October all the way up to November is going to be very erratic in markets. It's going to be choppy.
Absolutely erratic and choppy are the chosen words, I think, Jamil. Let's talk about Trump's spat with Beijing, still ongoing. We spoke a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, about the surge in tech stocks. They dropped rapidly after. But do you think that perhaps, you know, America will lose from this spat with Beijing, considering how important Huawei and TikTok are to the world? Could there be a new world order for the technology? Could Silicon Valley soon be somewhere in Beijing?
I think that this is the risk, because if you look at the news from last night, which is what the US lawmakers have said, specifically the Democratic view, is that technology is becoming too powerful, and they're alluring to the 5 big tech companies in the United States. So they want to see more regulation and less of a monopoly. And you can understand it from an outside perspective, because the US stocks, the major tech stocks, so I'm talking about the Facebooks, the Apples, the Googles, which is called Alphabet in the investment world, they now account for as much as 20 to 25% of the US GDP in market valuation, which is serious. That's a serious monopoly. At the same point, we know that all of these anti-globalization tactics, even if it's on headline, that the United States administration, specifically President Trump, has implemented over the past 4 years, where he's turned his back on a lot. If you talk about the United States political legacies, he's gone the other direction. So we could see, and it's likely that we will see more superpowers. We will see the likes of China with a stronger influence on things. We've already seen this economically anyway, but we could see this on a tech basis. The similar for other very powerful countries, the Russias, the Middle East. We probably are at a generational tipping point where we could see a change that happens over the next 1 or 2 years, that it could impact our children's life going into 2050. Absolutely. It seems like a lifetime away, but we shouldn't say nothing, because at the end of the day, lots of people didn't think the .com phenomenon, the internet, would really change life. But look at how it has changed our life in 2020.
Absolutely. Jamil, we're running out of time, but I can't have somebody like you on without having a forecast into next week. I know it's impossible, but what should we looking at? What should we be looking out for? Very briefly, please, Jamil.
The presidential debate tonight, it's significant because you got the vice president. So if Joe Biden at any point is no longer able to become president, you've got Kamala Harris who's going to step in. And then Pence is very interesting, the Republican nominee, because should Donald Trump's health unfortunately take a turn for the worst, Pence will be in charge of the United States until at least January. And that's if the Republicans lose the election. Otherwise, he is the next president of the United States. So that's what I'm looking out for.
Oh, Jamil Ahmed, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.